So, when we all thought Casey Anthony had crawled under a fucking rock and died, she hadn't, unfortunately. She came out with a documentary. The best Christmas present we can give you is that we watched it, so you don't have to. This is us talking about Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. Welcome to Enter the Dark. Hello and welcome to Enter the Dark. I am Jan. With me as always is Les. You alright, Les?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. First of all, Merry Christmas. Yes, it should be Christmas Day when this comes out. If it's not, just pretend it is. Or if you're watching this some point in the future and it's not Christmas Day, that's why we're not wearing Christmas hats and shit. Just, try and be cool like on YouTube. We haven't got to the point yet where we're putting makeup on, saying, love me, love me. That close. But yeah, people who we do love, though, are our Patreon supporters. So we've got Hannah Blue Arrington, Amanda Champagne, Astoria Crowley, A.B. Ember and Jet Colin, Lisa Dempsey, Marie T. Jensen, Casey the Cannibal, Misty Day, Becky Louise, Izzy from the Clink, Jules Henderson, Richard Veccarelli, Michelle Hudson, Alicia Llewellyn, Mandy Madden, Fire Pixie, Little Mascara, Kooky Fanny, Al, Verena Schmidt, and Krista Francis, and Swiss Phil. Yes, I remembered him without writing him down. Thank you for supporting us. It's amazing, especially at this time of the year. Thank you. It means everything to us. If you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/enterthedark. Give us anything from $1 up to $50. Whatever you want to. You get cool shit, free t-shirts, and all that jazz. Right. First of all, I have to thank some people for this. I have to thank Hannah for watching it. I have to thank Jen, our researcher, for helping me out and giving me some of the greatest insults ever for Casey Anthony. And also Adela for, she watched it and she shared it on her story and she let me print it off so I can give her thoughts on it as well. You're going in blind, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not watched it. So when I say we've watched it, it's more of a royal we. Yeah, you're going to go in blind. So if you haven't seen it, I know a lot of people are like, I don't want to watch that bitch. And it's, honestly, the only saving grace was, at least it wasn't Jodie. That's the only saving grace I can go out with. Now, I'm going to go through it, and then you can chime in whenever you want to. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, look at all this research I've had to do for it. There's like 30 odd pages here. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so part one, it starts off by showing how the production team, they've moved her into a small rental apartment at an unknown location for a month in order to produce the docuseries. Now, Casey does say it's because she's got a housemate and all that. Who would live with Casey Anthony? Who the fuck would live with Casey Anthony? Anyway, so she shows there and she's brought several things to the house, and obviously she's going to be living there so she can bring things. And she's brought pictures that she has of Kaylee, of her and Kaylee, and it shows hanging up a picture that Casey says used to be displayed in a parent's home, and it's one of her and Kaylee when Kaylee was really, really young. It shows her holding up this piece of framed art that Kaylee drew, and Casey talks about how she remembers when Kaylee drew it because they broke crayons and stuff like that when they were doing it. All of that bollocks. Then she goes out and starts taking some photographs in the swamp, and the first thing that stands out to me in this documentary is, remember the Bella Vita tattoo she had? She's had that covered up with some peonies and half a mandala, which apparently she says symbolises growth and rebirth.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. So I'm going to probably do the quickest rundown of episode 1 because it's shit that we all know anyway. So he wants the fucking tea. And like I did, I want to hear what the fuck Casey Anthony has to say after 14 years of her being quiet. So essentially the first half an hour is going down memory lane, recapping the case, showing the different, news stories, yada, 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 yada. Now, they play Casey's first phone call from jail to Cindy and two of the investigators from 2008, John Allen and Eric Edwards. get on there and they just briefly talk about the case from back then and how they think whatever happened to Kaylee Anthony occurred on June the 16th, and how Casey's behaviour became more and more erratic when she was out partying and getting tattoos, and all the madness that occurred post-June the 16th. Now, they did mention the infamous Bella Vita tattoo that she got on the 3rd, which, of course, I mentioned earlier, she's got covered up. And that was like one of the weirdest things I noticed, first of all. It's just weird that she'd had that covered up. You know, it is quite an infamous one for her, though, so I can see why she did do it. Anyway, so then it shows you Clint House and Cameron Campana, who were Tony Lazzaro's roommates, and Tony was her boyfriend at the time, remember? He was a DJ, remember? He had that night. Oh, yeah. What was his name? DJ? Oh, I can't remember. DJ Freeze, wasn't it, or something?
Something like that,
Something shit. Anyway, there's no new information of them, guys. It's just stuff that we've heard. Right, let's get balls deep into episode 1 now, okay? So, if you're thinking what's she been doing for money all this year, she's been... that question gets answered straight away. Now, following the trial, right, she seemed surprised by this. After the trial, her biological family did not want to help her. Now, remember, this is the biological family who she'd lied to for 31 days, told him Zanny the nanny did it, accused her dad of molesting her and rape, accused her brother of it as well, and she's surprised that they didn't want to help her. However, the defence team did help her get back on her feet, and she says for the past 10 years, she's been working as a research investigator for Pat McKenna, who was the lead defence investigator on her case, and she says that she loves doing the job because she doesn't want to see people railroaded by the media the way she was. What a fucking... You're a martyr. Anyway, Casey admits that she did lie to law enforcement. Really? And that she is a convicted liar, and she says that she is a little too honest nowadays. She's very blunt and direct. Painfully, to which her boss, Pat McKenna, right, verified, saying that over 10 years plus, he's never once caught her in a lie. And seeing that he's an investigator, he should notice these things.
You should, yeah.
The thing there is, he's never caught her in a lie. So that's like saying that you've never caught somebody murdering someone. Doesn't mean they're not murdering someone. Just means you haven't caught them murdering someone. Anyway, Casey says she lied previously. She always told a partial truth within her lies. And she said she had worked at Universal, and Annie, one of her friends, lived at the apartment complex she took police to. So there was a kernel of truth within her lie that she had taken Kaylee to that apartment complex. As we know, all good lies have a kernel of truth.
Yeah.
So it's okay that she lied about Zenaida Gonzalez being real and she'd been going out working at Universal Studios because she kind of told the truth a bit. Now, they then play Casey her portion of the 911 call where Kaylee is reported missing, and that happened on July 16th, 2008. Now, Casey says that she has no emotion in that call, which was evident, and says that she admits that it was very weird. And she said that she was so numb during most of that. They continue to play the portion of the 911 call where Casey's featured, and Casey gives her feedback on the call as it's playing. Now, if you remember, she blamed the babysitter, Zenaida Gonzalez, for stealing Kaylee on the call. And she did say she did meet Zenaida Gonzalez, and she was a nanny.
She was?
Just not her nanny. Now, remember, the police looked for Zenaida Gonzalez. They looked everywhere. They found a Zenaida Gonzalez who lived far, far away. And she came up and was like, yeah, I've never met her. I'm not a nanny. I'm not this. I'm not that. But now Casey's saying, look, she's changed the story again now. Zenaida did exist and she was a nanny. But it just wasn't her nanny. So the police were very, very wrong and just didn't get that bit right. Weird how the defence team didn't find her either.
Yeah.
You'd think that they would have done. Anyway, Casey also drives interviewers to the Universal Studio and parks in the parking lot just like she did back in 2008. And she tells them that while she was leading investigators to Universal back in 2008, she believes Kaylee is okay and thought that Kaylee was okay until they found her dead. Now, if you haven't watched the Universal interview, we've got it up on the channel. Go and watch that. It's essentially the police saying, we know you're fucking lying. We knew you were lying when you made us walk around here, and you were waving at people who weren't there, and they're like, who the fuck's this woman? And she isn't very convincing in that. But she says she'd lied to everyone because her whole life up to that point, she'd been acting like everything was okay. But nothing was okay in reality, Les.
No.
Now, she said that I had years of therapy and I am trying to explain my behaviours, which are all a reaction to trauma. She said that she's been suppressing her memories from 2008, and it's also said that saying all this out loud for the first time is a very painful process for her.
Oh, of course it is, isn't it, Casey? Oh, of course. Oh, come here. Come here, Casey.
Now, she remembers the detectives who she was with, and she didn't trust cops at that point in time, and she said that she was scared, and they said something like, oh, so you work here? And she hadn't worked there in over a year and a half, but she had in fact worked there at some point in time, which means it's okay to lie to the police. She remembers the interrogation room with John Allen, and they play a clip of the tape back in 2008, and she lies again, saying that the babysitter was the last person to see Kaylee. Now, Casey says then, I made myself look crazy and gave law enforcement absolutely no reason to believe or trust anything that I said. There's no justification for my actions or behaviour except to say I was doing what I was conditioned to do. Keep that in mind. This is the fucking horse she is going to ride on, okay? Now, she says that growing up, she lied more than she told the truth, and on the surface, her family was typical mother, father, son, daughter, your standard middle-class American family. Mum was a nurse, dad was a former cop, now working in security, and also wanted to be a Disney character deep down in his heart. And from the outside, it looked like they were the perfect
Remember
family.
that now.
Oh.
Remember that now.
Oh,
Was it
George.
Donald Duck?
That's what we said.
We reckon
It was Donald. And there were moments in time that was true, but she says they weren't really reality. Now, Casey says that life at home was a lie, and telling the truth wasn't allowed in her home, and it all comes back to her dad, George.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Poor George.
Yeah.
Poor George.
Well, Casey's saying, no, not poor George. Poor Casey. Now, she said George wasn't capable of telling the truth that he wanted to in the world to believe, and that he was the patriarch of the family, and that he supported the family, that he was the perfect husband and father, and hiding the fact that he wasn't actually working. And in fact, her mum was the sole breadwinner who was working all the time to keep the lights on and food on the table in the household. Now, apparently George actually took $60,000 out of Cindy's retirement fund, and he gambled that money away. But the story about how he lost the money has changed over time, allegedly according to Casey, and saying that her father was hiding the fact that he was having an affair. Ooh, George, you fucking sly dog.
George.
We all remember Cindy was a bit of a bitch. Really.
I just remember George as this, like, in my mind, George is this, is the victim of the piece.
I mean, Kaylee was the victim of the piece.
Well, yeah, but more so than George, obviously. But I do feel a lot of empathy for George.
Yeah, you have to feel empathy for George.
Because that motherfucker just wanted to be fucking Donald Duck. That was his fucking dream.
All he wanted to do was be Donald Duck.
Maybe that's why, you know, because like Casey apparently worked at Universal Studios, and he's like, bitch, go to Disney. Go to Disney and get me one of those Donald Duck suits. I just want to be Donald Duck. Maybe that was the affair. Maybe it was some weird
Maybe
Disney.
his affair was with Daisy Duck.
No, I like to think it wouldn't be an affair then.
No.
Because like Daisy
it was meant
Duck.
to be.
He was having an affair with like fucking Minnie. That's what he was doing.
Interspecies banging.
Interspecies banging. He was there with his fucking noodly corkscrew fucking duck.
Okay, let's not get into like this weird Disney porn now. Anyway, they wanted the picture-perfect persona of their family presented to the world, and it was just not the reality according to Casey Anthony. I will be saying those words quite a lot. According to Casey Anthony. Now, Casey mentions how she had nightmares and how they have become more frequent or worse recently leading up to the documentary being filmed. And she says that she has nightmares about her father holding her down and raping her. Casey alleges that when she was 8 years old, her father started coming into her room at night and she physically hurt and scared and felt like she couldn't tell her mother what happened because she was told that her mother would get mad at her.
Dressed as Donald Duck.
She said that just before her 12th birthday, the abuse stopped, but then her brother Lee started coming in after she was 12 and abusing her as well, but that stopped around the age 15. She stated that her brother Lee never raped her, but it was close enough where there was a pattern. She said that he did not tell her mum any of this until she was 19 and had become a mum herself. And she questions whether or not her mum was actually aware of the abuse the entire time. Casey said that her mother Cindy was extremely controlling and that Cindy wanted her to look as young as possible and she had to be that perfect little girl even when she wasn't a little girl anymore. Casey said that Cindy was always trying to create this image of what their family should be, which in reality was not how the household really was. Now, Casey thinks that Cindy was lying to herself about the family unit because the truth was too painful and lying was just easier. They then give an iPad to Casey and they show her this excerpt of a clip from an interview that her parents were doing at the trial. Now it shows them arguing and Casey says that's the interview that shows you the issues within Cindy and George's marriage, and the two are bickering back and forth and George is saying, don't make this a personal attack, it's not about us. And then Cindy goes on to say that Casey learned this behaviour from somewhere and, she's insinuating that Casey learned the bad behaviour from George. Now, Casey says that she replicated George's behaviour throughout the 31 days where Kaylee was missing, and she said it was to protect herself from what she'd done, but from the outside world and what had happened. Now, she'd asked why she stole the money. Remember, she was cashing cheques in a friend's name and all that stuff? Yeah. And she said it was just a shitty mistake. And she admits that she used and manipulated those around her in an attempt to appear normal, which was, of course, extremely abnormal, and she says she didn't know how to ask for help. I mean, you used to phone your dad enough to say, I've run out of petrol, to the fact that he used to fill up petrol cans and I'd keep them in the fucking garage to come and give them to you. But she didn't know how to ask for help. Sorry if this isn't going to be an unbiased view.
It's hard to ask for help when your dad's Donald Duck.
It isn't. Just go. Interviewers then ask her about the covering up of her infamous Bella Vita tattoo. And in the case that she said the Bella Vita tattoo was a fuck you to her family. She spent her whole life protecting the family image, and therapy has helped her realise why she got the tattoo during that time period. And it helped her voice why she did that, which was to speak out against her flawed and fucked up family.
No, Bella Vita, yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that like a type of breakfast biscuit? Bella Vita.
Yes, but that's not Bella Vita.
No. But
Bella Vita is sort of like a biscuit.
Yeah, it's a breakfast biscuit, like an empty biscuit.
But it's Bella Vita means something else.
Yeah, it does.
Is it the Good Life?
That's something? The Dolce Vita, isn't it?
Don't know. That's Dolce Gusto, that's a coffee.
Exactly. So you could have a Bella Vita with a Dolce Gusto and
a really shit tattoo?
Not kill your child.
You could do, but then again, we're not Casey Anthony.
Exactly.
So then Casey then shows off a new tattoo that she has on the inner left side of her upper arm. And it says, I hear your voice and all the sounds of the world. And which she says is her tribute to Kaylee. Not, sorry I killed you because I wanted to go out dancing. Casey then goes on to talk about the time period when she was pregnant with Kaylee, and how when she was 6 months pregnant, her mother, who was a nurse, didn't admit to people that Casey was pregnant, even though she was obviously pregnant. And Casey felt like her mother was embarrassed of this, and she said that the family would all continue to say she wasn't pregnant, but that's what they all agreed to say. Now, Can't you remember when Casey said she was a virgin? She was like, I can't be pregnant, I'm a virgin. Then they went around saying it was water weight at parties and that. I mean, we'll give out at the end. 3 hours of my life I wasted watching this shit. 3 hours of my fucking life. More with Casey Anthony. Anyway, so this is where the interview starts to get a bit interesting. We've always wanted to know, who's the father of Kaylee? Right, yeah? Now, Casey says that she was raped at a party when she was 18 and that Kaylee was a result of that sexual assault. Casey says that she got drugged at a party and she woke up with her top still on, but her bra had been pushed up over her breasts. Her pants and underwear were on the floor and she could feel that she'd just had forceful sex.
Or was she Winnie the Poohing it?
She goes on to say that she was scared and confused and was full of questions herself. Had she consented or had she not consented? Just going to say now, if this is true, then I feel really sorry for you. That's disgusting. If this isn't true, Casey, what the fuck? This is why people don't get believed. Because people like you will fucking lie about shit. So, not saying I hoped you were, but I hope that bit's true. Because that would be... I know you've already lied about killing your daughter, but Jesus Christ, this is 14 years later. Don't make yourself a bigger monster. You piece of shit. Anyway, she didn't report the alleged rape because she wasn't sure that anyone would believe her, and she knows how no one is believed, especially when you were a girl drinking at a party. Especially when people just fucking make shit up, Casey. Casey said that she realised she was pregnant as a result of the rape almost immediately within a few weeks. Casey then goes on to say that Jesse Grund, which was the father, which was a man she had started dating around that time, and she realised that he wasn't really Kaylee's father based on the timeline. But she made the decision not to tell him that, and that he wasn't really Kaylee's father, and to let him believe that he was, and she let him believe throughout the entirety of her pregnancy that he was the father of Kaylee. But of course, a paternity test proved that it wasn't true, and she said that she never told him how she really got pregnant, and that she started to lie that Kaylee's father was an old friend of hers. Can you remember the man who died in a car accident?
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember him? That lie that she read in a newspaper. Casey admits that she lied to everyone and that it was fucked up. Really, Casey? Then why should we believe you now? She also shows her tattoo that says Kaylee Marie, and it's... Oh, sorry. Then we cut over to one of her friends. Right. Now, this is an actual interesting part.
What's this on?
This was on Peacock in America.
I really want to fucking watch it.
You don't need to after we finish with this.
Yeah, I know, but I still do. Still want to watch it. I watched the Jimmy Savile one.
You could have watched it for research.
Could have.
I literally told you we were doing this, and you said, I'm not watching that shit.
It's true. I said, I believe my words were, I feel that she lives rent-free in my mind. And
I've spent too much time with Casey Anthony. I am not watching that shit.
Yeah, is that
what your words?
Were my words, right, okay. There we go.
So they go on to interview one of Casey's friends, who's called Annie. Now, Annie talks about how she and Casey used to be best friends. Now, Casey started dating one of her friends in high school and became friends as a result of that. She also shows her tattoo that she's got that says Kaylee Marie, and it's featured on her left shoulder, and she gets emotional discussing it and says that she got the tattoo and Kaylee's on it. I mean, I didn't think you'd got it just out of fucking randomness. Anyway, Annie said that Casey was a good mother to Kaylee and that she does not believe that Casey Anthony killed Kaylee to go to the party. In fact, she doesn't believe that Casey killed Kaylee at all. Annie said that Casey was never the life of the party. In fact, Casey didn't even go out and party with them very much at all, and that the media just took a few images from a few nights and then blew them out of proportion, which we did say.
Yeah, we did say that.
Did say that. Nancy Grace didn't. Bitch. Anyway, Annie thinks that an accident probably happened and that Casey did what she always did, which was lie. And she said that when she was friends with Casey, Casey lied about everything, but she did tell small truths with it all of her lies. So, that makes it all better. Anyway, they hand Annie an iPad and they play part of a recording between Annie and one of the detectives from 2008, when you can clearly hear her telling detectives that Casey told Annie that what she was doing and she was doing what they had told her to do, Now, she does state that she doesn't know who they are, but it's presumably George and Cindy, and then Casey says that she lied because she was doing what George told her to do. So, part 2. We're into part 2 now. This is where it starts getting good. She starts getting batshit crazy. She comes on all fucking guns blazing with this version of events leading up to Kaylee's death. Okay? Now, Casey says the night before was just a normal night, and the morning of Kaylee's death, she woke up and when she got Kaylee some breakfast, but Casey wasn't feeling really very well, so she wanted to lie back down. So after getting Kaylee's breakfast, she put Kaylee in bed with her, and she closed the door and put the TV on, and of course she had Kaylee in bed with her, so she's got Kaylee with her. Now, Casey says that she's always been a light sleeper because she is used to someone opening the door while she's asleep, and she's used to being on alert, especially with her child lying next to her in bed, which is part of the reason why Kaylee slept in bed with Casey so often. Now, Casey says that she thought she locked the door to the bedroom before she fell back asleep, but maybe she, in actuality, did not. Casey pointed out that her dad, George, was home when she fell back asleep, and that she remembers that she'd been asleep for a while when she was awoken by George shaking her, asking where Kaylee was, which didn't make sense to her because she thought Kaylee was lying next to her in bed. Casey says that Kaylee would never just leave the room without telling her, even if it was just to go to the bathroom, so she immediately gets up and starts looking for Kaylee. She goes on to say that after she got up and started looking for her in Kaylee's room, as well as the garage, and then goes outside to start looking for her, she's nowhere out there, and she said it didn't make any sense to her where Kaylee could possibly be. Casey is then asked if she'd ever checked the pool when she went to look for Kaylee, and Casey says she'd never had to. She said by that time she came back around the house and George was standing there with Kaylee soaking wet in his arms, and that George handed her Kaylee's body and said, "This is all your fault," and Casey said she remembers collapsing with Kaylee in her arms to the ground. She described Kaylee's body as being heavy and cold and said that she was hysterical with Kaylee in her lap, not knowing what to do when George softened his tone and told her it's going to be okay, she was going to be okay, and she really wanted to believe George when he said that. I mean, I didn't believe George. Casey then says she doesn't remember how long she was outside, but that George at some point took Kaylee from her and walked back into the house with carrying Kaylee, and she doesn't know what he did with her after that. All she knows is she felt broken, numb, confused, and hopeful that Kaylee was going to be okay, like George says she was going to be. Now, allegedly following this on the same day, Casey says that she went to her boyfriend Tony Lazzaro's house, and she stayed there for 3 weeks out of the 31-day period between this occurring and the authorities being notified, and that throughout these 3 weeks that she was staying with Tony, she was acting normal because she claims that is what George told her to do, and both roommates told police that Casey was acting normal the entire time she was there. Now, Casey said that the pictures of her partying online throughout the 3 weeks that she was staying at Tony's house surfaced, and she wasn't actually partying. If you notice, there's no alcoholic beverages in her hand or anything like that. She was actually working, helping her boyfriend Tony to promote the clubs. I mean, you were on Xanax, so maybe you didn't need alcoholic beverages. Now, she believed throughout the entire time that her daughter Kaylee was still alive, and that George told her that Kaylee was still alive, and she did what George told her to do, which was continue to act normal, and she did what she needed to do to survive. She states that she was never in contact with George. She was in contact with George during the 31 days between whatever happened to Kaylee and the authorities finding out, and she continued to ask George daily if Kaylee was okay and when she'd be able to see her again, and she claims George told her that Kaylee was okay and they would be reunited soon. She says that when you fear someone, you're conditioned to say and do things you refer to, even when you're an adult and even in bad situations. Casey said that she'd held that mentality that Kaylee was okay and everything was going to be okay while she was in jail, saying that she still remained hopeful from her jail cell. They show a clip of her talking to George and Cindy and she gives feedback watching herself from 14 years ago. She said that she was looking at George throughout the phone call because she wanted to believe him so badly, and even though she probably knew deep down what had happened and that nothing was okay, she really did not want to accept the fact, and that she held on to that hope and continued to believe that everything was okay until December 2008 when Kaylee's remains were discovered. She doesn't say the fact where she phones home and just asks for Tony's phone number and doesn't want to speak to her parents, and the bit where she's just talking to George and it's clearly she's manipulating him. She does brush over a few facts, like the squirrel she hit. Remember when she said she hit a squirrel?
Yeah.
The stench of death with a squirrel. She didn't stop and report it. Fucking monster. At that point, she starts talking about finding out how she found out that Kaylee was in fact deceased. And she said that while she was in jail, they brought her into a room and the news was on, and they sat her down and she saw it splashed across the news that remains believed to be Kaylee Anthony were found, and she says she just lost it, and they show footage of that from the jail. She says, yes, I was naive. Yes, I was dumb. The whole time I thought there was still a chance that she was okay. Now, this is where it gets interesting. She's asked whether or not she believes that Kaylee could have potentially drowned in the pool, and her response is that drowning in the pool is not possible. In most scenarios, it would be plausible, but not here because the ladder wasn't on the pool, which is the only way in and out.
Right, okay.
Right, now think back to the video where we covered the case. Her defence at the trial was that somehow Kaylee got through the sliding glass doors, which they have a picture proof of her able to open the door, and that she climbed up the ladder and got into the pool and she accidentally drowned. Right?
Right.
That was her defence that got her off. And now apparently there was no fucking ladder on that pool.
Mm.
In this version of events, she explains that the use of that defence was Cindy's idea and the defence just went with it. Of course, Jose Baez, who, went on to represent Aaron Hernandez, and he's a big piece of shit. Of course he did what Cindy Anthony said. There was no way that he'd come up with
that himself,
No. It has to be Cindy. The defence told her that they had to tell the jury something she couldn't just not know. Now I believe that bit. I believe we need to tell them something. And that's why they brought up the George's was sexually molesting her all through his life. And then they didn't bring this up for the rest of the fucking trial. If they had this fucking evidence, in case he was like, yeah, okay, they do this, where was the evidence? They brought up they didn't even question him about it when he was on the fucking stand.
Tell me about the rabbits, George.
So, so she's asked the obvious. If she didn't drown, then why would her body have been soaking wet, that she said when she saw George hold it to her? Casey says she was not the only one home, and she is not outright accusing her father, George, of murder, but she doesn't think it was an accidental death in the pool.
Michael Barrymore.
So, she's not accusing George of murder, but he was the only other one home, and then he turned up with her dead. She says she wanted to know why he didn't call 911. We want to know why you didn't call 911. She says that she feels guilty for failing to have protected her daughter and for continuing to fail her by not bringing up the allegations of abuse against her father and brother to the attention of other people sooner, and in failing to do so protecting the person who she believes is responsible for the death of her daughter Kaylee, and that is her father George. You ready to go down this fucking rabbit hole?
Yeah, take me. Take me down the rabbit hole, George.
So now they delve into the accusations of sexual abuse which are perpetrated against Casey by her father, George, and her brother, Lee. Now, Casey says that when she was 8, she remembers her father starting to slide into bed with her, and she would pretend to be asleep while he touched her. She has a memory of him moving hair off the back of her neck, and he would put his hands down her back and under her shirt, and she remembers the first time he put his hands down her pants and slid from back to front. She goes on to state that she was told that she was safe and it was okay, and this was a special time. She said that she remembers a few times where she tried to fight back, but it's not like she could just push him off even when off her. She even said that he put a pillow over her face several times and claims that he would smother her on nights where she would ask him not to do this. She would later wake up knowing it had happened again. She said that she was just a little girl, but that she was Daddy's special little girl at night. The documentary then goes on to try to substantiate the claims that Casey has made against her father and brother by referencing letters that Casey wrote to fellow inmate during the time of her custody. Now, Robin Adams was a fellow inmate that Casey Anthony was writing these letters to, as well as the letters that Casey Anthony wrote her make an appearance, but that's not the first time that these letters have shown up. So if you're new to this case, neither of these letters, if you're not new to this case, these letters aren't, because in 2008 and 2011, these letters were actually leaked to the public because they were jail communication and privy to public access. But the point in the documentary bringing up these letters is that it shows that Casey was referencing the abuse long before the defence was using it. Doesn't mean that they didn't tell her to do this.
No, it doesn't.
She was telling a fellow inmate this, and she was doing it before anyone else knew about it, not knowing that others were going to find out or that it would ever be used as part of her defence in the 2011 trial. I find that very hard to believe. The documentary then tries to further substantiate these claims by bringing in medical professionals that actually worked with Casey Anthony back between the years of 2008 and 2011, preparing to go to trial, all of which have said they believe Casey Anthony's allegations to be true, and they even said that they all evaluated Casey, and there's nothing wrong with her. She is not a sociopath or a psychopath or any of the other things that the media continue to say about her, and still continues to say about her to this day. They said that there is no medical basis for those claims, and they also bring up the fact that Casey's ex-fiancée Jessie testified during the 2011 trial that Casey had opened up to him, talked to him about the sexual abuse that she claims her brother perpetrated against her when she was a kid, and Casey stated that only opened up to Jessie about the sexual abuse that she alleges against her brother because she had already forgiven her brother, and that made it easier for her to talk about. But she was never told anyone about the allegations against George because she said that it was much, much harder for her. Casey then goes on to say that after the birth of Kaylee, she had worked up enough courage to tell her mother Cindy about the alleged abuse and that she was claiming her brother Lee perpetrated against her. Casey then said she didn't tell anyone about the abuse and that she alleges that her father George perpetrated against her until she was away from the family in jail, and she felt like she could finally open up and tell somebody about this abuse. Casey states several times that she deeply regrets not speaking up about the abuse sooner. So the rest of part 2 is going over things we already know, and the defence team saying that they believe Casey. Of course they're going to do, because they fucking rested their laurels on it. Yeah. So, part 3. This entire episode is essentially their case against George Anthony. So this is what we should have done in trial. Okay? So, Casey says that she still needs answers for why all of this happened in the first place and why her father George continues to pin it all on her. A blogger by the name of Kristen Patton was featured in this episode, and she wrote a blog around 2014, which is really good, actually.
Yeah.
Essentially, what she did was an unbiased review of the Casey Anthony case.
Okay.
So, going in sort of blind, totally unbiased. Now, she has some interesting things to point out, and throughout part 3, they do build a compelling argument for the case against George Anthony. Okay? So at the very least, they bring up enough questions that makes you wonder why police that were conducting the investigation and why prosecutors on the case left those gaps to be questioned in the first place, because some of them are very easy things you could have gathered information on and just proven up front, just so something like this wouldn't happen.
All right.
Okay. So they point out several statements that George Anthony made throughout 2008 and 2011, and say the contradictory statements that he made throughout the exact same time period, depending on who his audience was. Now, they point out how George Anthony told the media that the car smelled like pizza and trash, while at the same time George Anthony was telling the police that the car smelled like decomposition, which is a very, very distinctive smell. And George, having been a cop, was well aware of that distinctive smell. And despite the fact that George was telling the public through the media that Casey's car smelled like pizza and trash, he testified at the trial that Casey didn't want anyone near her car, and he was the one who told the jurors that Casey had human decomposition in the car. Now, Casey said that during 31 days she ran out of gas.
Right.
And George was supposed to get the car, and he told her to leave it somewhere that he could find, so she had 2 guys help her push it off the road to a spot. She said there was no dead body smell, and she doesn't even know what that smells like. Then how do you explain the squirrel, Casey? The squirrel that you hit, that you said got stuck in the grill and got on the engine and smelt. Don't you think we forgot about that squirrel, you fucking bitch? Anyway, she said she had nothing to do with the smell that was in the car at that point, and they play a clip of Jose Baez questioning George Anthony. Remember Jose Baez?
Mm-hmm.
The man who was sleeping with Casey Anthony for payment?
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't go into that, weirdly, in this documentary. She doesn't go into that.
It's funny how his surname's Bias.
Oh, it's Baez.
Bias.
It's not biased.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. It sounds similar, doesn't it? Like,
yeah, but I think that's more correlation more than causation.
Yeah, definitely. But it's just interesting.
Anyway, in the clip, he's admitting that he didn't call to check on Kaylee or Casey after claiming to have smelt the smell of decomposition in the back of the car, and Jose asked him why he wouldn't have done that, given that he was a detective and he would have known what that smell was, and he responded saying that he wasn't a cop at the time, he was just a grandfather and a father. Can you remember when George was like, oh, my wife's going to divorce me? He just wanted to make a friend with that guy.
Yeah.
Bless him. Please go back and watch the case that we did, because it's one of our best ones, I feel. I was quite proud of how funny we were during that case of a child dying.
Well, you've got to find the bright spots, haven't you?
You fucking have to with Casey Anthony. Anyway, they also point out an issue with the time frame as well as the cell phone records. Now, George Anthony told the police that around 10 to 1 or shortly after Casey and Kaylee left the house, because cell phone records were able to pinpoint Casey's location essentially at every moment, and on that day George said that Casey left for work. Okay? Now, and she took Kaylee to see Zanny the nanny, and she was actually at the house until 10 past 4 when she went to Tony Lazzaro's house. Now, investigators from the case even admit that George did lie to them and stated that everyone in the family lied to them at one point or another throughout the investigation, but that being a liar doesn't make someone a murderer. It's true.
It's true. Yeah.
The defence, having Casey's phone records and being able to verify that George was saying that she'd left the house around 1 o'clock was inaccurate, they can prove she was actually at the house after 4. With that same thought process, the defence wanted to know where George was, and as it turns out, the investigators and prosecutors actually did not get a full and accurate copy of George's phone records, because the police stated that they think they did get a copy of his phone records. Now, however, if they did, they weren't concerned about getting a full and complete copy, because that would indicate and pinpoint his location, because they didn't think that George had anything to do with it, so they didn't think it was relevant. Now, it gets pointed out that George was supposed to be at work at 3 that day. However, Casey said that her father George works less than 10 minutes away from home, and since they don't have George's cell phone records, they can't even prove whether or not it's true, and it didn't appear like they had his work records one way or the other to confirm or deny that he actually showed up to work that day and what time he did so again. Now, something really simple that you could have just got up front could have just solved all this. So they didn't. So I don't know if it's just like whataboutery or whatever, but this is kind of circumstantial evidence that gets you screwed over.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Because imagine you know nothing about this case and I'm just telling you about George Anthony now. You're going to be thinking, this guy's dodgy. You don't know about his daughter being fucking mental. Now that the reason that this got brought up is relevance, because we know the trial, that at 2:51, someone on the family computer was searching for foolproof suffocation methods. They also looked for formaldehyde. Chloroform, wasn't it?
Chloroform, yeah.
But her mum was chlorophyll, because the dog was eating a leaf, and she went and auto-corrected to chloroform, and then she read some things about chloroform. Anyway, George's affair also got brought up, but Casey said that the family computer was for everyone, so anyone could use it, and she was not the one making the Google search at that time. Doesn't go into the fact that they didn't check the Firefox records, Casey, and that in them you were searching for a whole bunch of shit about murder. Just saying. So George's affair was also brought up because, one, it was the worst possible timing for it, and two, because the woman he had an affair with ended up testifying at Casey's trial, and what she testified to was that George had unburdened himself on her one day, and that he told her it was all an accident, and that just snowballed out of control. When she says unburdened, Les, he meant got everything off his chest, not just jizzed on it. Now we cut to when the two of the investigators that worked on the Casey Anthony case go out to visit the area where Kaylee Anthony's remains were found, and they discuss the condition in which the remains were found and the items that were found on the body and how they link back to the Casey Anthony home. Remember, she was found in a bag that they had the matching thing to at home and all this shit. Now, what's more interesting, though, is how the defence say the way the Kaylee Anthony's remains were found suggests that George is the one who did it. Now, remember, Lee Anthony, Casey's brother, said that when the family pets had died, George would wrap it up in a blanket, place it in a trash bag, duct tape the trash bag, bury it, which is exactly how Kaylee's remains were found. Now, George Anthony also had a heavy involvement throughout Casey's trial, and that's something the defence feels is worth taking a look at. Now, they point out that if George believed that it was an accident, then why would he testify as the star witness for the state in an attempt to get his own daughter the death penalty? Have you met her? I mean, you'd have to deal with the shit then, would you? If it was an accident, why would you hope for death on your own daughter? Because she's Casey Anthony. He's sick of his shit. They also bring up the fact that George and Cindy were able to sit through the entire trial. Now, that doesn't really explain it in this documentary, but I'm going to. Now, there's this thing where if you're a witness at a trial, you're not allowed to see everybody else's testimony because that will influence you until after you've testified, yada, yada, yada. But there's a loophole, and the loophole is that they are grandparents of the victim, and so they were permitted to be able to sit inside of the courtroom for the entire trial, which meant that they heard everything that was said or not said before they testified, after they testified, and when they went back up again, they went up to testify over again. Because George testified several times himself, but he got to hear everything, single thing that was said or not said in between his times taking the witness stand. Now that is a bit dodgy.
That's a bit weird.
They could have, but I mean, that's on the judge. The judge could have said, no, you can't do that. That's not fair. I understand that, but, you know, you witnesses, you can't do it. That's on the judge, not on George Anthony. Now, according to the jury, they also play a clip of the jury foreman, right? And he was talking about the Casey Anthony trial and talk about George and what the jury thought of him. Now, the jury believed that George might be lying and did not like some of the statements that George had made when he was testifying. Okay, and the foreman stated that George didn't have any memory of things that he should have remembered, but knew very specific little details about other things. For example, he knew what Kaylee was wearing that day that she went missing, so aka the day that she died, but couldn't say what everyone else was wearing that day. And so the jury said that he had selective memory, and that made them have trust issues with the things that George had to say. I mean, reasonable doubt. Despite how the jury felt about George throughout Casey's trial, the police had a very different view of George Anthony. He's one of their own, though. The two investigators from the Anthony case said they featured on this documentary stated that there was no other suspect besides Casey, and the police said that Cindy was reserved with him, and George was always helpful. George told the police that Casey was the last person to see Kaylee alive when Casey allegedly left for work that day. They said there was nothing to indicate George was responsible in any way for the death of Kaylee Anthony. They also show more from the two roommates that lived with Tony Lazzaro, the boyfriend that Casey was with at the time. They point out different things they believed, suggestive of George's guilt. Now, when they get shown this information, right, they're pretty shocked. One of them just looks like fucking thick and like, oh, what? What's going on? And the other one goes, oh, I need a 5-minute break. And he goes off to gather himself during this break. So, but thing is, it doesn't say there, have they been in touch with Casey before? Has Casey said to him, look, when they're showing you this, act really fucking shocked. Like, oh my God, I can't believe this is it. Oh my God. You know what I mean? Casey points out that the statute of limitations does not exist for sexual assault in Florida, and that she could still very well report George for the allegations of sexual assault that she has against him. Fucking go for it. Go for it.
Yeah.
If you believe, if you're saying what you're saying is true, you've had all this therapy and you're able to talk about this now, and you realise, well, that was wrong. Go for it, Casey. Go for it. Let it go to trial. She also mentions a statement that her father made about how he loved the sweet smell of Kaylee's sweat. That is weird. And the interviewer tells her that George actually said that at Kaylee's funeral. And Casey said, what a better way to memorialise your granddaughter than to admit that you were abusing her too. And then says that she's going to need a minute, starts to break down, and the camera team has to take a pause. She does actually cry quite a bit during this. Weird though, because I don't see any actual tears coming from her. Once she regrouped, she might have been dehydrated. You know, it's hot in Florida.
Sometimes it's hard to, like, when you're repressing, like, sort of grief and, like, shit like that. It's you want to cry, you just can't let it out.
Can you stop being a Casey Anthony apologist, please?
I'm not being a Casey Anthony apologist. I can't help but now see, like, her fucking dad, George, as George Costanza from Seinfeld. I don't know how this image has worked its way into my head, but, like, George Costanza in a fucking Donald Duck outfit. It's just...
Right.
It's just there. Okay. It's just there, and it's not fucking moving. I'm sorry.
You keep it in your head. Once she regroups, she has to watch Kaylee's funeral, which she apparently has never seen before, and she wants to hear what her father said herself. So they play the funeral of Kaylee for Casey, and Casey says that the funeral was not private or personal, two things that she begged her mother to do for Kaylee's funeral. And instead they did this publicly broadcasted and very large, in Casey's words, non-personal funeral for her daughter. She's such a fucking wordsmith, isn't she?
So good. She's like fucking Wordsworth or some shit.
Oscar Wilde shitting himself, isn't he?
Yeah.
They play the clip of George's words that were spoken at Kaylee's funeral. Specifically, Casey cries and looks repulsed as she hears the word her father's words. And she says nothing about what he said was normal. He is outright telling the world that he's a paedophile. She then states a lot more things make sense now. That's not necessarily a good thing. And that she thought she did everything she could to protect Kaylee. She tried, but she didn't leave when she should have. She says she was also she should have left the moment she was pregnant, but she stated that she never left Kaylee alone with her dad. not even when she was an infant, because as a child of abuse, she feared that her daughter wouldn't be safe. She talked about how she didn't tell people that she was working or how much she was earning because she was secretly plotting an exit plan to get away from her parents, and so she started working at bars and taking cash tips, and she didn't even want Cindy to know about it because she didn't want Cindy asking questions, so she lied to her Cindy about where she worked and said that her mother lived through her and that George wanted Casey to be the biggest liar possible so that no one would ever believe her again. I mean, if that's what he wanted, he got his wish. The possibility of what occurred that day and how Kaylee died was discussed amongst Casey and a member of her defence team, Pat, who she lived with for a while. Now, she says there's no way Kaylee drowned and he found her in the pool. They said he had to get into the pool and there was no way to explain that unless her father George literally put her into the pool, that it would look to be an accidental drowning or appear that way, and they wouldn't have looked at Kaylee's body.
So it's not a pool in the ground, is it?
No, it's a raised pool.
It's one of them raised...
Yeah.
That poor people have.
Yeah. Now, George is doing his best. Do you have a pool?
No, I don't. I have no need for one. I just don't like that kind of ostentation, Jan.
Yeah, well, George did. Anyway, Casey says that she thinks that perhaps that if she had told the truth sooner, things would be different now. Really? And she said that she'd always wanted the truth because she has lived so long without it, but she doesn't know if she can actually live with actually knowing the truth about what happened to her daughter, Kaylee.
What?
She said that it crushes her that she protected her abuser as well as Kaylee's abuser and that she can't let that go. She said that victims often protect their abusers because you still love them and you don't think that you're trying to hurt you, and she goes on to say that she still wakes up thinking sometimes this is all a bad dream and that Kaylee is lying right next to her. Now, she's asked for Kaylee's ashes many, many times, but Cindy will not give them to her. And after that, they show Casey an interview of George and Cindy after George's car wreck. Remember when he had that big metal thing?
Yeah, the big... yeah.
And in that interview, George stated that Casey had reached out to check on him, and Casey said, "No, I did not." George goes on to say that in the interview that he forgives her and needs to be forgiven for what he's done. And Cindy says, "Did you look to be forgiven for you? What did you do to be forgiven? You didn't do anything. It was an accident," and Casey looked dumbfounded and asked for him to replay that part of the interview. She says that she's no longer a little scared kid and now that she's just angry over the years, that the anger has built up, and she talks about one of the things that she's still angry about is that on TV her dad acted as if he supported her, and to her face he acted as if he supported her. But then he was telling law enforcement something totally different, and then later on ends up blaming her on TV for the whole world, which is different than the initial stance he took when talking about her on TV. It was almost as if he was trying to get you to admit to something, Casey. It was almost as if he was a policeman previously and kind of knew what he was doing. All in all, right, all 3 episodes, Casey just wants to know why people continue to keep blaming her for something she didn't do, and it's made abundantly clear throughout all 3 parts of this docuseries that Casey's defence team truly stands behind her and she truly believes her innocence to this day. Now, that's fine. The female attorney for Jodi Arias still believes in the fucking ninja theory.
Did you just say female?
Yeah, because there was 2 of them. There was the guy and the girl.
Why are you calling her a female?
Because she's a female.
It's the lady. Oh, lady, woman. What?
I say the lady lawyer. I know. It's patronising.
Fucking female? Sound like some sort of fucking MRA?
You sound like an MRA.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
I don't.
You do. Look at you. Sitting there with your fucking MRA jumper on. Drinking your MRA beer.
Got my MRAs.
Anyway, shut up. Anyway.
You females.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
She identifies as a female.
Okay, I know. Sorry. Just like, that's... See, this is payback for all the racism.
Well, or your racism.
I don't do racism.
You fucking do. I just cut them out. Anyway. So, now, I actually do believe Casey's sincerity throughout this. but she's had 14 fucking years to prepare for this in documentary. During that time, I find it hard to believe that she hasn't watched all those interviews that she says she was watching for the first time, and also she hadn't seen the funeral, which there is. You can just go on YouTube and see it. Now, as I said, if she truly is a victim of sexual abuse, I feel desperately sorry for it and how her life's turned out and how it's spiraled out of control. And if it's true, I will apologise. I will hold my hand up and say, I am sorry for all the horrible jokes we made about it. But if she isn't a victim of it all, and she's using this as a front to try and clear a name, then she's fucking more scummy than I ever fucking thought. And that was pretty fucking scummy. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought she was a child killer. And this is even more scummy. People, like I said, people doing that actually make it harder for victims.
They really do. No, they do. Yeah. I agree.
And do I believe Casey Anthony during all this? No, I don't. She's a fucking narcissist. And having seen how people are jumping on the bandwagon of the TikTok generation, saying, oh, I think the Menendez brothers are actually innocent because of this, that, and the other. That's all she's trying to do. She is trying to get into a generation of people who weren't around when the fucking case was going on and saying, like, look, this is my story. And I've seen it already. People going, oh, well, I watched it and she was crying and I actually believe her. It's like, it's because you're a fucking idiot. You've been drawn in by it. She's an idiot.
Look at the Matt Hancock thing.
Yeah, I spent 3 hours listening to this fucking idiot's bullshit again. I want to apologise to Hannah for making her fucking watch it. I'm sorry.
Thanks, by the way, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. But I am sorry I made you do that. But the only saving grace was, in this entire thing, at least it fucking wasn't Jodi Arias. Can you imagine that? Jesus Christ.
To be fair, though, the Jodi Arias thing was, like, way more interesting.
Jodi Arias is going to do one of these, isn't she?
Like, I fucking hope so. With the ninjas.
Yeah.
And the Mormons. Yeah.
Right, so, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us know. Do you believe Casey Anthony? If you do, I'm not going to...
I think it's... I don't believe her. Like, there's too much getting through the case like previously. There's a bit... Nah.
Yeah, fuck Casey Anthony. And also, why did she phone 911 really quickly when that woman threw a drink on her?
Maybe it was purple drink.
You called the police then, didn't you, Casey? But yeah, thank you, everyone, for watching. Merry Christmas. It's been awesome. Thank you for everything you've done for us this year. Just hanging out with us. Next year, we're going to have loads more stuff coming up. We're going to be having guests on these things as well. So there will be somebody sitting next to us. Not physically, just like...
They'll be on a computer thing.
Yeah. Yeah, a computery thing. That's the technical term, innit? But yeah, we're going to have guests. We're going to have loads of different stuff. We'll do a video covering all that. But yeah, thank you. If you want to reach out to us, you can. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Email us at enterthedarkpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to give to us and support us, you can do. You can go to patreon.com/enterthedark. You get stickers, mugs, t-shirts and shit like that. It's cool. We have fun. Just reach out. Chat with us.
Reach out. Give us a shout.
Not him. Actually, Jen, the researcher, she said to me last night, she was like, by the way, which one am I talking to, Jan or Les? I was like, Jan. And she was like, this is after she's done a lot of work for us. And she was like, oh, right. I was like, Les doesn't communicate. And she was like, fair enough. But yeah, the names of the patrons are going up now. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I've been Jan. He's been Les. Take care. Casey Anthony's a bitch.